Welcome back, everyone, to Data Science for Everyone. Today, we're going to be talking about case studies. Let's get started. So, first off, a case study is an empirical inquiry that investigates a contemporary phenomenon within its real life context, when the boundaries between phenomenon and context are not clearly evident and in which multiple sources of evidence are used. A case study can both be the process engaged in to investigate a phenomenon and the written output of that investigation. The study is both the fieldwork and the report of that fieldwork. There are three types of case studies which we're going to be looking at: intrinsic, instrumental, and collective. And the intrinsic case study is one that is carried out for no other purpose than to give us a better understanding of the case. The case is studied as much for its ordinariness as for its peculiarities. For example, you may wish to examine your own service or your own department in considerable depth. With an intrinsic case study, you would be doing that so no other purpose than to acquire a deeper understanding of that service. If you wish to examine a particular phenomenon, then it would be beneficial to conduct an instrumental case study. In this case, the purpose is to investigate a particular phenomenon or theory, and the case itself becomes less important other than as a vehicle for our investigation. The term collective case study is used to describe a research study that uses more than one case to investigate particular phenomenon. Usually, the study is a collection of instrumental cases, as it is rare for a study to focus on multiple cases for their own sake, although it is possible. Triangulation within a case study can be achieved by using multiple data collection techniques and multiple sources of evidence, and this is very common for both. Phases of case study research. This is a useful framework for organizing the case study process. So for phase one, we have orientation and overview. For phase two, we have focused exploration. And for phase three, we have member checking. These phases are going to be used to organize the case study in stages because although these stages are iterative and will not occur in a linear fashion, they will occur within a single phase of the process. Phase one, this is establish a research focus to which you can refer over the course of the study. Remember the rule that you will achieve more by attempting less. The research focus is an instrumental case study is usually a program, a person, or a group of people. An intrinsic case study would look at all of these aspects. This will be done by establishing a broad aim and identifying a number of objectives at the outset. These objectives are usually specific enough to be operational in achieving the aim or aims, but also flexible enough to allow for emerging issues to be followed. Qualitative case study research can grow beyond the original aims of the research once issues are identified and discoveries begin to surface. The researcher needs to remain focused on the purpose of the research and not be distracted by issues that are not necessarily related. During this phase of a case study research, the researcher determines what approaches to use in selecting single or multiple real-life cases to examine in depth. When using multiple cases, which would make the study a collective case study, each case is treated as a single case. The conclusions for each case can then be used as data contributing to the whole study. But each case remains a single case. This creates an additional layer of analysis, as the individual cases must be analyzed before any themes can be examined across and between the cases. The purpose of a case study should be driven the selection of an appropriate site. Very often, the site is already known in advance, particularly when researchers choose to study their own environment. It is important from the outset to select a site that will provide rich and detailed insights. This means ensuring that multiple data collection techniques will be possible and there will be access to artifacts and people holding relevant information about the case. Gaining entry does not only include the formal aspects of signing off and gaining permission, it also includes establishing trust and building up a rapport with all of the stakeholders, participants, informants, or gatekeepers. The researcher must explore what the salient issues are within the context and begin to determine who can provide insight into these issues. Within the case study unit of analysis can be a single person, a group, or a program, or a system. It is up to the researcher to determine the appropriate unit of analysis for providing insight. Case study research always uses purposive sampling to identify information-rich sources within the case. It should be noted that the case or cases will also be selected using purposive sampling, although often this will mean a sample is only one site. In any bounded system, there are key informants who will have a great deal of knowledge about the case as a whole and what goes on at the variety of levels within the case. These key informants may include the gatekeepers who were responsible for allowing you to access to the site, but they will not be the only key informants within the case. During a case study, you will collect and store multiple sources of evidence. This needs to be done comprehensively and systematically in formats that can be referenced, sorted, so that converging lines of inquiry patterns can be uncovered. There will be a vast amount of data to handle, and it is important that this is structured from the beginning. There are a number of choices available, but the earlier in the process the data is structured, the better, as this type of case study produces not only vast amounts of data, but data from many sources and in many forms. You may want to set up a database that stores the data by personal source. Who said it, wrote it, and did what? Or you may decide that the structure of the database by data collection technique, interview transcripts, observation notes, focus groups, records, or artifacts. It is up to you to decide how to do this, but early structuring is essential to retain control of the emergent design of the data. Qualitative case study design does not allow for a priori selection or design of individual data collection techniques and instruments. The emergent nature of the investigation means that very often it is impossible to say exactly what data collection techniques will be applied until you have a feel for the site and begin to establish what is needed from whom. The purpose of the study is defined within the context of the social actors inhibiting the study. It is they who are at the heart of the investigation, with their own experiences and the meanings they attach to those experiences. There are obvious data collection techniques available to capture these experiences and meanings, so it is possible at this stage to indicate likely techniques, such as interviews and observations. It is essential that the capacity of a case study to accommodate emergent design is not inhibited at this early stage. So identify your key informants and gatekeepers. Data collection usually begins at the very open interviews and discussions with these individuals. This will give you an overview of the issues within the case study site and alert you to salient topics and possibly other key individuals. Your sample will begin using information collected from these key informants. Observations will also take place in this initial phase, although they are unlikely to be particularly well focused at this stage. Once you have identified the issues and your initial sample, it is possible to decide on your approach to a more focused data collection. At this stage, you will be in a position to identify who needs to be interviewed next, if further observation is necessary, and what other techniques would be appropriate. Try to resist the urge to become too prescriptive. Remember to allow your design to emerge and respond. So, an example of phase 1 research. Phase 1 is to maintain a researcher's diary throughout all phases. So we need to maintain initial contact and make initial contact, obtain consent via sign-off forms, interview to identify salient issues, observe the participant using electronic information sources, begin the iterative analysis, and identify subsequent participants using a snowballing sample. Now, this time frame could be 3 months, 3 weeks, 3 years. It just depends on the time frame of your study. Now, focused exploration. At this stage, at which we'll engage with your sample and begin gathering data on the case study. It is not necessary to have all members of the sample identified. An interview with one respondent could lead directly to another member of the case study. There can be no rigid structure imposed here. To do so would be to lose one of the greatest benefits of a case study. The ability to respond to your knowledge of the case increases. The number of data collection techniques are available to case study researchers: interviews, observations, document analysis, and focus groups. Sometimes questionnaires may be appropriate. In part 3, we will discuss data collection techniques in detail. So use that next section to determine the appropriateness of the design of your data collection. When deciding on which techniques to apply, it is vital to do so in terms of the appropriateness of the technique to the research question and the feasibility of the technique in the context. You must consider practical issues such as the time you have to conduct the fieldwork, availability of the people you have sampled, and the nature of the environment and the feelings of those you have sampled. Always be aware that you must retain a rapport with the community. You are not making a one-off visit, then leaving within a rapidly harvested data. You will be spending some time in this environment, so it is essential that you remain sensitive to the demands you are placing on the sample group. A major strength of the case study research is that it's going to allow for confirmation or refutation of emerging themes as the researcher is aware of them before vacating the site and can adapt to the data collection responded to these emerging themes. Immediately after each data collection exercise has taken place, the researcher usually transcribes interviews, observation notes, and carries out the transcription personally. Can also assist you to begin and analyze them while you recall the event. Then you can interrogate the transcriptions manually and identify initial categories. Each category should emerge directly from the raw data. You should purposely ignore any assumptions and interpretations at this point, although you can take the time and retain notes and include them in subsequent stages of the analysis. The creation of initial categories or themes will not only inform the analysis, it will also allow you to identify salient issues which may need to be revisited during the subsequent cases of fieldwork. An example of Phase 2 on focused exploration. So interviews, observation, non-human sources, content analysis of documentation, interviews with experts who are likely learning resource managers, librarians, and other teachers, and etc. And the iterative analysis is going to be throughout this process. This is going to be probably one of the larger chunks of time. It's going to take up to 8 weeks, 8 months, the larger portion of the phases. Phase 3 is member checking. Now, the dialect aspect of a case study research can be accommodated in a number of ways. By workshops where participants are engaged to compare and contrast the individual constructions of reality by debate, by individual readings of their own individual accounts, or through full case study reports. This gives the participants the opportunity to confirm the credibility of the stories and to examine the cross-case themes as interpreted by the researcher. Those involved are given the opportunity to read their case reports and encouraged to comment on the contents, adding their own interpretations. State claims that members' check is a vital component of the study, not just in terms of adding in the credibility of the study, but also improving the quality of the final case report. There is some debate on how far participants should be engaged to go in the terms of altering what has been said and done, but it is the responsibility of the researcher to control this procedure to allow for the maximum information yield. It is also necessary to complete a dialect aspect of the study. So an exit strategy can be designed early in the research process. Information redundancy is usually the predominant criterion for leaving the field. When all data collection tools cease to reveal any new information, then it is time to close the fieldwork. This may also be tempered by time restrictions on the study. Exiting the field may also be a clinical process described in the literature. The participants in the study can become involved in the research process to an extent that may be beyond the past experience of the researcher. The relationship necessary to carry out in depth case studies places a great deal of responsibility on the researcher to involve a strong rapport with the participants while remaining removed from the situation. This can be more difficult than originally assumed. It helps if the researcher begins to refer to the end of the fieldwork during phase 2 to make it clear that the participants that they work with will come to an end at some point. At the beginning of the fieldwork, it helps each participant to give a study outline. Dates should be included even if they are broad estimates, in order to give the participants a definite picture of the structure of the study. Once it becomes apparent that the fieldwork is not yielding new information, the researcher should tell participants that the study will end soon and refer them to the original study outline. In multiple case designs, the cross-case analysis can only take place when all individual cases have been completed. The final phase of the member checking with each case needs to be completed. Then, the findings from each case can be used as a raw data for the cross-case analysis. That said, the themes for this analysis would emerge as each case is being analyzed. The nature of the process makes it impossible to separate the points at which themes grow and develop. This approach to case study research aims to present rich descriptive narratives at the micro level and to provide detailed descriptions which will allow the reader to make sufficient contextual judgments to transfer the holistic case studies to alternative settings. It will also draw out the concepts and tenets of a theory using cross-case themes as they emerge from the analysis. Case study research can be presented in a number of ways. The most commonly used method is to use a convincing story, which relies on rich pictures to create by descriptive narrative. This is not the only option available in a case study research. Depending on your audience, you may wish to provide visual descriptions of the case. If so, you will construct rich pictures using diagrams and evidence. The options will be discussed later in more detail, but an important thing to remember is that constructing narratives is also a form of analysis. Writing theory as it emerges from the field is also recommended. It is not necessary to leave this until the end. You will certainly have to present your research participants with some form of written description if you are to allow them to contribute to the informed member check. Trustworthiness in this case study research is demonstrated using the criteria discussed previously to establish credibility, transferability, confirmability, and dependability. An example of the final phase is the member check, and the case study is subject to the scrutiny of the participants individually and during workshops. This is the shortest part of the phase, and it will end with the write-up of the final case study. In summary, using case studies is the most appropriate method when the purpose of the research requires holistic, in-depth investigation of a phenomenon or situation from the perspective of all stakeholders involved. When context is vital to the research question, the investigation must allow for context, space, and time to become part of the analysis of the situation. Although divergent design is a significant advantage of the case study research, it is still possible to formulate a broad research design from the outset, allowing the researchers a degree of control over the process. The role of the research is very much that of being a research instrument, interacting with the research community and allowing that community some degree of ownership of the research. Analysis is ongoing, although there will be a lot of work remaining after the field work is over. It is impossible to conduct a viable case study without engaging in the analysis from the initial data collection. Case studies are not intended to produce generalizations. They are intended to allow for transferability of findings based on the contextual application and applicability. Two important things that a case study that we need to understand. One, we need to drill down further, and two, to create a three-dimensional picture, we need to actually focus on intelligibility and focus on our stakeholders. If you guys like this, please comment, subscribe, and hit that like button, and I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye.